All right, so welcome everyone to our webinar. This is the first in a series of 4, starting the year strong with morning meeting and responsive advisory meeting. This webinar is going to focus on using morning meeting and responsive advisory meeting to begin the year in a way that helps build a strong community with your students and the rest of the adults that are also part of your classroom community. Both morning meeting and RAM are practices that provide a predictable time and place to build that community with your students and make connections with students. And that's a great way to start the year. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jane Kofi. I'm joining you from my home here in Richmond, Virginia. I am the Director of Curriculum Instruction with the Center for Responsive Schools in the Programs Department for Responsive Classroom. But prior to joining the Center for Responsive Schools full-time, I was a classroom teacher. I taught pre-K through 5th grade for 20 years before becoming a full-time staff member with the Center for Responsive Schools. And I am joined by my incredible colleague, Dr. Joe Tilley.
Thank you, Jane. It is a pleasure both to be with Jane as well as everyone that's joining us. It has been such a treat to see all the different places that are being represented tonight with your presence. And so along with Jane, I want to take a moment and say welcome. We're so excited for you to be here. I got to be very honest with you. It is really just completely overwhelming to me at the moment to think that it's time to start school already. I feel like that the summer has just flown by. And so it's such just a wonderful time of the year where we're all excited to come back and to start doing things. With that said, I am Joe Tilley. I do work full-time with the programs department within Responsive Classroom. I'm the programs research manager. Prior to that, I was a curriculum and instructional designer and was a CT, full-time presenter, consultant with us for a while. I've been full-time with us now for several years. Prior to that, I also was in the classroom. I was a special education teacher, kindergarten through 8th grade. Never high school. That one was a little much for me. Didn't get to that point, but I've done everything from pull out to push in, inclusion, and resource and all of those things in between. And so I'm really excited to be with you tonight. I am currently coming to you from Chicago, Illinois. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, but I was presenting earlier today to a group of teachers that students come back for them on Tuesday. And so, excuse me, I'm coming to you tonight and super excited to be with you and super excited with Jane to share with you ideas on starting the school year off. It's always, this time of year is always that time where we're all trying to figure out what is that high interest, high impact activity that I can do with my students that starts to set the stage for them to be successful as a group together. And Jane and I are excited to talk to you a little bit tonight about morning meeting and responsive advisory meeting and how to use both of those to get you all started off. Before we jump into the content, excuse me, my allergies are kicked up a little bit. Before we jump into the content, I do want to take a moment and just give you a few pieces of overview for the webinar tonight. So Jane and I can see one another and we can see the chat and those types of things. However, we are the only two that will be visible to everyone. And so you can see us, but we cannot see you. We can see the question and answer feature that's found in the toolbar of your Zoom. And so if you have a specific question that you would like to ask, feel free to go to that and to put it in there. Obviously, the chat function is something that we can use and everybody can see it. I will say that if you use the question and answer function, there is the ability for you to send that question just to Jane and I. So just kind of wanted to throw that out there and let you know. The chat feature allows you to make some comments and things like that. We would ask respectfully that you withhold from throwing questions into the chat box, just because it's helpful to put them into the question and answer so that we can answer them in an appropriate manner. So just please do that. And then you will get a recording of this webinar in a couple of days. And so if you can't get enough of us tonight, then you'll get the ability to rewatch us several times. And so we are excited to be with you tonight. We also do want to encourage you, though, as we're going through, if there's connections that you're making, or if there are things that you're doing in your classroom that you suddenly are spurred to think, oh, this would connect here, drop those types of things into the chat, share those types of things with one another. And then if there are questions in regards to any of the logistics pieces or specific to any of the content, just drop that into the chat function for us. Give you a second to take a look at these learning goals. I don't want to read them to you, so I'll go ahead and let you have an opportunity to read through those. As you're reading through those, there's just a couple of things that I want to point out, and you will likely hear Jane and I repeat these things as we're going along. The big thing about morning meeting in RAM is it's intended to be an equalizer for students. And so as you're setting up for the year, just remember these ideas around significance and belonging, how to meet those of all students, how to be inclusive of all students, regardless of ability or prior knowledge. And then really thinking through this idea of those low risk activities that'll help to build that idea around routines and procedures. And it also can be high interest, but just low risk. And so that's our goal for tonight. We're excited to present this to you. And we're looking forward to working with you all tonight. With that said, I'm going to kick it back over to the amazing Jane and let her get started.
Thank you, Joe. So with that being said, we actually want to hear from you first, and using the chat feature, just as you've been using so far this evening or this morning, depending on where you are, we want you to put a response in the chat box responding to this question. What are some ways in which you build a positive community with students at the start of the school year? So some of you have already started your school year, so you can drop in the chat box. What are you doing to build that positive community with your students as the year starts? To take a moment and think, and then share those out. We've got a lot of expertise in this space right now. Oh yes, smiling, absolutely. Icebreakers, morning meeting, interest inventories, greeting at the door, turning and talking, so many great ideas. I hope you're catching these. Doing all about me, asking questions so you can find out more about students. Oh yeah, I remember doing all about me bags with students too. Welcoming them to your space, whether that is your classroom or another space in the building. I see hopes and dreams in there. I see morning meeting in there. Oh yeah, checking in to see how they're feeling. Such great ideas. If you did not already get a chance to do this, make sure you take a peek at the chat for all these really strong ideas that your colleagues are doing to start the year off in a way that allows students to feel just seen and heard, but also to start to build that community with your students. Oh yeah, absolutely. So many really great ideas. All right, so I'm going to ask us to hold on to those, but keep them coming, because all these are really great ideas that we want to keep in mind, because the idea is when the year starts, it's like a clean slate. We want to be able to start the year with students in a way that allows them to feel seen and heard, and also that starts to build that positive community with the class that we have. So one of the practices at the beginning of the school year that provides like a great opportunity for building those strong and positive relationships with students is morning meeting in the elementary grade levels. Morning meeting, for those of you who are familiar with it, because I saw it go through the chat, is one of those practices that's intended to be engaging and inclusive of all students, but it's a great way to start the day in a positive way. And it happens the same time every morning to just get the day started off. It sets the tone for the day. And so during morning meeting, students gather in a meeting area in a circle, and it can be anywhere from 15 minutes, depending on your time and what time is allotted to you in the mornings, all the way to maybe 30 minutes if you've got that time. And depending on those particular time frames, you go through the same sequential components. We start with the greeting, which allows students to have the opportunity to be seen and heard, but also feel that sense of belonging right away, to be called by name. And then the sharing, which allows students to feel that sense of significance and practice those social and emotional skills and get a chance to reinforce and model them. And then the group activity follows the sharing, which allows students to have fun with one another and build a repertoire of activities that they enjoy. That just becomes something that they've done together to help support that positive community. And you close your morning meeting with the message. And the message is kind of like the springboard into the learning that's going to happen for the day. So whether it is very specific on a subject area that students are going to engage in later on in the day, and you just kind of want to find out, what do you know about multiplication, or you want to find out, something about like, how was your first day? What is something that you really enjoyed about the first week of school? The message allows you to do that. And I saw in the chat earlier, someone said something about checking the pulse of your class and being able to do that with the message, which allows you to figure out what's happening with your students, but also to help build those relationships in that community, because you're part of that community too. And so morning of meeting allows you to merge all these pieces together and set the tone for the day right away at the start. So we're going to think about, in thinking about morning meeting, before we start to think about responsive advisory meeting, what I am going to do while Joe shares a little bit about responsive advisory meeting for middle school, I am going to put into the chat box a link to a little bit more about morning meeting. So for some of you, it's very familiar, and for others, it's a newer practice. And that way, it's either a review or it'll be something where you'll just get more information about morning meeting. And while I'm doing that, Joe's going to share about responsive advisory meeting.
Thanks, Jane. So I guess it would be appropriate here to maybe talk just a little bit for a moment about the difference between morning meeting and responsive advisory meeting. And I suspect that the majority of the people that have joined us tonight probably know, but for those of you that may be middle school only, or you may be elementary only, and you haven't had a lot of crossover, here's morning meeting is primarily done with elementary school students, and the responsive advisory meeting is part of the middle school program. And so Jane she's got a lot of, she's the expert, let's just be honest. She's the expert when it comes to the elementary side of things. And I will not call myself the expert, but I will say that I've been fortunate to have a lot of success in the classroom with the responsive advisory meeting. And so I'm blessed with the opportunity to talk to you tonight about that. And you'll see some parallels between the two programs, but there are a couple of different pieces to it. The goal, the idea around the responsive advisory meeting is to give students opportunities and those frequent, consistent opportunities to, and Jane, if you'll advance for me. So you can go ahead and put them all up there. That'll be fine. And so Jane has been so kind tonight. Because I'm traveling, I only have my one computer, and it makes it a little bit of a challenge to navigate some of those things. So she's been so kind to man the PowerPoint, and so thank you for that. So these are the reasons why we do advisory meeting, responsive advisory meeting. First and foremost, we want students to have an opportunity to meet with a caring adult. This consistent opportunity is there for them to build that relationship with an adult. If you think back to the elementary school experience for most students, there's that single teacher that they really spend a lot of their time with. But in the middle school programming, oftentimes there's not. They're splitting their time between 6, 8 different adults through the day. This advisory meeting opportunity gives them that opportunity to build the relationship with the caring adult in the building that they can go to and talk to and get advice and talk through things. This advisory meeting opportunity also helps them to develop positive relationship with their peers. They are talking to one another about things that are important to them, things that give them significance, things that make them feel belonging. And as they're talking through those pieces, as they are learning new skills and new structures and new systems and such, they're also developing these relationships with their peers. And it helps them to develop stronger relationships with their peers, because it is in this low risk environment in which they're sharing. And it's not always directly connected to content. And so they're getting to talk about their favorite subject in middle school, which is themselves. And so it gives them that opportunity to share some of those things with other people that perhaps otherwise they wouldn't get the chance to share. And then lastly, developing their academic and social emotional competencies. So often we get asked the question, when do I teach these things? When am I supposed to teach these things? And we all know that oftentimes social emotional competencies and academic competencies are built in to the actual content that we're teaching or to a activity within a classroom. But when we are trying to teach some of these things in direct isolation, this is that opportunity. So it doesn't take away from language arts. It doesn't take away from math. It doesn't take away from orchestra. It doesn't take away from band. It doesn't take away from any of those classes in which we have standards or we have content that we have to cover. So this gives us that really good opportunity, for example, to talk to students about the appropriate way to be assertive in a classroom, or why homework matters. And so you get to have these deep, rich 15, 20-minute conversations with students about these things that you normally don't get that opportunity. And so that's what the responsive advisory meeting is. And in a bit, we'll talk a little bit about the structure and the components that are there. But this is the overall reason why we do it. And so, Jane, with that, I think I'm kicking it back to you.
Thanks, Joe. So as Joe shared about responsive advisory meeting, I am going to add to the chat box an article that just gives you, what is it? So if you are just wanting to be able to hold on to that information, maybe for a colleague or for yourself, you have that to refer to. And as Joe was pointing out, with both responsive advisory meeting and with morning meeting, the intent is to really be able to support students in feeling that sense of significance and that belonging. And so with that being said, we're going to pose a question for you, different one for you to put in the chat. And there have been so many really strong responses that have been coming through. So we want to find out what you're thinking about this particular question. So how might students act or respond when their needs for belonging and significance are met? So just think about the students that you've had, the students that you have. What does that look like? What do you notice? Oh yeah, engaged, open, confident. Yes. Open to sharing. They take risks. They feel secure. They're happy. Such great adjectives. Successful. Goodness, yes, absolutely. They're really calm. They're engaged. They feel a sense of independence. Absolutely. They're able to take on challenges. They're open to those challenges. They're interested in learning, risk-taking. So much being said in the chat. That feeling of bravery, curiosity, being, yes, engaged in listening, absolutely. So many great things coming through the chat box right now. So if you have not had the opportunity already to read what people are putting in the chat box about this question, the response to this question, what you notice about how students might act or respond when their needs for belonging and significance are being met, take a moment to look at what your colleagues are putting in about just what they notice about the students they've had, the students they have, and when they feel that sense of significance and belonging. That's really important, that we want to be able to create that feeling for students really at the start of the year. It's like the first impression. You want students to feel safe and secure. Absolutely, Jennifer, I'm seeing that. And that you want it to be a joyful place where students are coming every single day. And so morning meeting and responsive advisory meeting are two practices that allow for us to create these feelings in students from the start of the day or from the start of the year. So we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about the things you just shared about belonging and significance and its importance, and why we want to make sure we're using practices such as morning meeting or responsive advisory meeting to help support in that feeling, but not only that feeling of belonging and significance, that it's more than just a feeling, but we want to create that tone in our spaces for our students. So morning meeting and RAM, they're intended to establish that positive community through the positive interactions. What Joe was saying earlier, that there's a trusted adult that they can speak to and they can share these ideas with, but then also they are building this community with other classmates where they can feel a sense of safety and belonging, but then also be willing to take those risks and, yes, reinforce those positive attitudes and behaviors. And so we want to be able to do that for our students. There are social science theorists and researchers like Maslow and Dreikers that will say things like after your basic needs are met, like food, clothing, shelter, that human behavior is motivated to meet some other needs. And these are the needs of belonging and significance. So think about what that feels like for you when you're in a space where you feel that sense of belonging, like you feel like you belong here. You can connect with people. You're probably doing some of the same things that are listed in the chat. You probably feel really confident. You feel like pretty calm. You feel like you can take risks. You feel excited or happy. You feel just that your behaviors are being reinforced. The same is true for students. When they're in a space where they feel that sense of belonging, they are feeling and acting in those ways. The same thing that for that sense of significance. Just as humans, we want to be known for the things, the skills, the specific skills and mastery of different things that we know. And so when we allow for students to be able to share, for example, whether that's in responsive advisory meeting or in morning meeting, we're allowing for students to feel that sense of significance, be known for the things that they know and be known for the things that they can do. And that also opens it up for other students to be able to say, well, this person can do this. I can connect with that other student, or I don't know anything about this. And this is something that I might, connect with this person about later. Same is true when we create those environments that allow for students to feel that sense of significance and belonging. We're creating an environment where students want to be. And I saw that in the chat. We want to make sure we're creating a space where students want to come back, where they enjoy being there. There are probably places, even for us as adults, where you'd rather not be, where you walk into that space and you don't feel that sense of belonging, or you don't feel that sense of significance, and what that feels like for us as adults. Imagine what that's like for students when they're in a space that they don't feel that sense of significance, or they don't feel that sense of belonging. We want to make sure that we're creating environments in which students are seen and heard. They're seen and heard and known for the things that they can do and for their talents and their interests and their strengths. And we want to make sure that we're setting that up at the start of the school year. And so what we want to do is take some time to give you some tips to help make your morning meetings, but then also your responsive advisory meetings successful for students, so that they're feeling the sense of significance, that they're feeling that sense of belonging, but that also you're creating a positive space for students to feel safe and for them to reinforce those positive attitudes and those positive thoughts and want to take risks in your space. So we're going to first look at morning meeting and the strategies for success that we can use there. The very first and most important thing is planning purposefully, just like you would with any other area, subject area with your students, or like the first day of school. You know what you want to do, and you're thinking about, okay, here's where my students are going to be sitting, here where these tools are going to be, or these materials are going to be. We want to think about morning meeting in the same way. I don't know about you, but I know there have been times where I may not have planned something out and I have it kind of worked out in my head, but when it's not planned out, I can kind of see it fall apart. And there are places where if I had planned it better, then I would see different results. The same is true for a morning meeting. If we want students to be able to, for example, learn one another's names, which is a really important part about feeling that sense of significance. Names are important. And so if I want to support students in getting to know one another, I'm going to spend time planning how students are going to get to know one another and use one another's names. And I can do that in the greeting. So I might choose a greeting that's lower risk, one in which students may only have to talk to one other person. I might partner them with someone close by. They get an opportunity to learn at least one person's name, but then also maybe introduce that person. Sometimes it's a little bit lower risk when you're introducing someone else and maybe not yourself on the very first week or day of school. And that can help students learn one another's names, but also even something small as pronouncing one another's names in the way that they would pronounce it. Something else to keep in mind is just if you're thinking about making sure you plan purposefully, that means also knowing your time. So if you know you have 10 minutes for morning meeting, you're going to purposely plan how long or what type of greeting you're going to use. You may also be thinking about what kind of sharing structure you'll use, what group activity is going to be best for your students if you only have a short amount of time, but also knowing the message is going to be a powerful piece to springboard students into the learning that's going to happen. Something else to keep in mind so that your morning meeting can support significance and belonging, but also building that positive community, is establishing your procedures and your rules ahead of time. So there are some situations in which You already have class rules, and there's times where you're going to be collaboratively creating the rules with students. When it comes to morning meeting, it's okay to have a few established guidelines, maybe 3 of them, something like participate respectfully or kindly, depending on where your students are developmentally. Respectfully could be a large or a really big word for students, so maybe kindly. Sitting safely, coming empty-handed, things that are going to help support your morning meeting and help it to run smoothly. It also means thinking about things like having a signal for attention and teaching that ahead of time so that you can use it during morning meeting. So whether it's a chime or whether the signal for attention is something like a raised hand or something else, that your students know what it is so that they're able to respond appropriately to that signal when you use it during morning meeting. Something else to keep in mind is modeling and practicing the skills and procedures that you want students to be successful with. That comes part of planning. So for example, if students are going to need to come to a specific area for a morning meeting, and there are many paths to get there, it's important to go over the paths that you feel are going to be the safest for students or are going to allow for students to get there in a timely manner, because we know sometimes students will find the longest way to get to wherever they're going if that's the mood that they're in. So making sure that we discuss that with students and being able to share that information with students so they know how and what is appropriate in order to start morning meeting. Other things to think about is how you'll have students sit. Some educators feel comfortable having specific seats that students do at the beginning of the year, and that might be helpful in order to cut down on what could be feeling like an unsafe environment, because I have to find someone to sit next to, and maybe I don't know everyone. Maybe I'm new to the school. Maybe I'm just new to this particular environment, and that can be pretty daunting for students. So maybe assigning seats at the start so that students don't have to worry about where they're going to sit. It also gives you an opportunity to see and kind of troubleshoot and figure out your students a little bit that way too. And it also helps them remember names. If you're having students come to a meeting area, also determine whether or not they're going to be sitting on the carpet or whether they're going to be sitting in chairs, because it's something else that you want to think about to help your morning meeting run smoothly. Something to keep in mind when you have students come and they're sitting on a carpet or on the floor in a meeting area space is allowing flexibility for how students sit. So I know when I first started, it was like everyone sits crisscross, but then also think about as an adult, some adults, like that is not a way that they can sit. It's not comfortable. And that's also true for students. If you have all children sit crisscross, what happens on that day when you have a student who's wearing a skirt or a dress? It may not be appropriate for them to sit that way. And then it only limits the seating to children sitting or wearing a certain type of attire for them to sit a certain way. It's a great conversation to have with some of your older learners, like what are some ways that we can sit that would be safe and allow us to listen respectfully during morning meeting. And they'll come up with some ways, but you can also help them consider different ways. Or if you have some younger learners, you can give them, here are a few ways we can sit that are safe and that are respectful during morning meeting. And that allows some flexibility for their seating, that all students can feel comfortable during morning meeting. Also, teaching students one of the procedures, like reading the message when they first come in at the beginning of the day, and knowing that's going to have something interactive for them to do, whether it is place a tally here if you rode the bus today and you're just trying to figure out buses at the beginning of the year, place a tally under which bus you rode this morning or this week, so that it allows students to engage with the message in some way, but also it can serve dual purposes. So if it's something like the buses that they're going to be writing, then it helps you keep track of who's writing or how many students are on what bus. It also gives you the opportunity, if you're modeling and practicing skills, things like tone or voice level are also important, and being able to model that during the greeting or during the sharing or the group activity or the reading of the message. The next thing is thinking about beginning with simple and low risk meetings, things that allow for all students to access all of the components of the morning meeting. So that might be something as simple as looking at the morning meeting book, if that's something that you're familiar with, or the first 6 weeks of school. But if not, it's something as simple as keeping all of the components something where all students can participate. So an activity, for example, like Just Like Me, which is led by typically the teacher, and just here are some things that they know that you want them to know about you. So it might be something like, I enjoy eating fruit. And if all the students who also enjoy eating fruit, and depending on your comfort level for what you have students do, it can be something where they stand up and say just like me, or they raise a hand and say just like me, or you can do a little bit of both, but it allows them to learn more about you and also one another in a low risk way. The other thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about low risk components for your morning meeting is the sharing component. Sharing requires many skills for students to be able to listen, to respond, to retain what was said, and in some cases come up with a response, whether it's a comment or question. That's a lot of skills all at once. And so it's okay for the first few meetings to maybe not have the sharing component right away and something that you add in a little bit later. You might be the sharer for the first few weeks to model for students what it looks like and sounds like when you share, and then using an activity like who remembers after you share. So you might share a little bit about yourself, and you might say to your students before you start, so we're going to do an activity called who remembers, and I'm going to share a little bit about me, and I'm going to ask you some questions about what I shared, so be listening. And it helps students work on the skill of being an active listener. And then also it helps them listen to the tone that you're using, and also things like how long you share and what you share about. So that it ends up being a model for your students. And then finally, allowing many opportunities to practice and build on those things slowly. The components of morning meeting don't have to change every day. You can do the same greeting all week long. It allows you to troubleshoot, but allows children to continually practice skills, learn names, but then also be successful with that particular greeting over time. Same thing with your group activity or your sharing structure. You also want to keep in mind that you can do those for several days and change them on different days. So I wouldn't change all the components of my morning meeting every Monday, for example. That's a lot for students to sit through and to remember. Maybe I only change my greeting on Tuesdays and I change my group activity on Fridays. And that way students still have something that they can remember and that they feel successful with, and that's familiar to them before you change another component of your morning meeting. And you want to be able to scaffold the skills they need. So for example, if I'm doing a greeting in which eventually students are going to have to do a wave, and maybe I want them to all wave and make eye contact, I may just make it that the very first day you just turn to one person and say good morning to them, and we just practice our tone and using eye contact and saying that person's name. And then maybe by the end of the week, we add a wave. And so we're adding variations to it that build upon each other so students can feel successful along the way. So with that being said, one thing I am going to do is I'm going to drop the link to some planning guides. It's a link to all of our planning guides, but you'll find the links for morning meeting. So planning out one day of morning meeting and really thinking purposefully about what you want to accomplish, but also planning out a week of morning meetings is also something that you can look at too. And so I'm going to have Joe now share with you about responsive advisory meeting.
Thank you, Jane. I just want to say before I start talking about this, the more you talk, Jane, the more I just kept thinking to myself, this is the time of the year that is the hardest to not be in the classroom, because these are the moments that I so remember how much I love this time of the year where you're doing these things with your students, and it's just you did such an incredible job of explaining things that it made me think, man, I wish I was co-teaching with you and I was in the room with you when we were doing morning meeting. So with that said, piggybacking a little bit on what Jane said, you'll see some of the similar type of things that she talks about. The thing that I do want to draw everyone's attention to, because I think it's really important, because it's important to understand that morning meeting and RAM, they really do a good job of being such an equitable activity for everyone. If we do our jobs as the educator, what we essentially do is we set up activities inside the classroom that every student can access, regardless of where they are from a skill level, regardless of what they have or haven't been previously taught, and regardless of what their background knowledge is. I don't know an easier way of saying it than to say this. When it's done correctly, morning meeting and RAM respects the diversity of all of your groups. It includes every single student, and they get to perform to the level that is comfortable to them. And it's also one of the most equitable opportunities for students because they can access it regardless of what's going on. And so when we're thinking about working with advisory meeting and the things that we're doing, first and foremost, in order to be successful, you want to make sure that you stick to the flow of the components, introduce them, do them in order, and do them with consistency. You want to make sure that you're always welcoming those students at the door when they come in, and you're greeting them by name and you're talking to them and that sort of thing, because that just sets the stage for significance and belonging. Think about how cool it is to walk into a classroom and the teacher know your name and be able to greet you in that way. And I understand, y'all, I'll just be really honest with you. I have always struggled to remember people's names until I've been around them for a little while. And it was always, you would always like come up with these ways of trying to get around it, like, hey, buddy, good morning, buddy, things like that. And I got away with it when I used to work with elementary kids. But the minute I got to middle school, boy, those middle school students just put me on blast. And it's because that significance piece, that belonging piece, they start to really attach themselves. They want you to know who they are. And this is that opportunity for them to be known. And that first encounter with them as they're walking in that door, when you say good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is that's greeting, and then you use that name, you are really saying to them, you are so significant. You belong so much into this room that I know who you are. Have those announcements ready. Announcements somewhat a parallel structure to like a message that is written for the morning meeting. But the announcements are in a similar place every single time. You don't want them moving around. You don't want them hunting for them. You want them to be accessible both in the way that you have written them, meaning that you've used language that is accessible to all students. And then you also want to make sure, like, anybody that knows me knows that my handwriting is absolutely atrocious. And so for me to write the announcements, like physically write them out, none of the students would be able to read them. And so thinking about using, something to project them, whether it's a Microsoft Word document, it's a PowerPoint, and then using fonts and things that they can easily read, but making sure that they're there, they're waiting on them to come in, and they're accessible to all the students. The acknowledgements and the activity, you want to make sure that you're working toward having students getting comfortable greeting one another by name, sharing some of these low risk activities with one another during the acknowledgements. It really helps for students to start to see one another as part of the group and part of the classroom community, and it allows them to start doing to really start making connections that otherwise they're not allowed to make during content-based classrooms, meaning that maybe during the acknowledgements, you have them greet 3 people that they're not sitting with and ask them to share with them their favorite sports team. Now, that's a question that might not be appropriate for math, and it might not be appropriate for a theater class, but it's completely appropriate for RAM because we're allowing them the opportunity to start to get to know one another on that personal level that's low risk, but it's high interest. And then lastly, the activity. A couple of things that I'll say about this activity, and it's really important to think about this. You want to get to a point where you're including all students in the activity, but I want to be really transparent about what we mean when we're talking about all students during the activity. You do still want to provide students with individual private think time if they need it. You want to provide students with the opportunity to, say, work with a partner or work in their small groups before you come to the whole group. And so don't do activities that immediately go to a whole group structure, because if you do that, you're oftentimes rewarding the students that process information the quickest and excluding those that may need a little extra time. And so when you're thinking about structuring your activities, think about how to scaffold in supports for those students that might need a little extra time. Think about, partnering up a student that sometimes might share things that you think to yourself, I wish they didn't share that all the time. Have them partner up with a partner that might look at them and say, maybe there's a better way for you to say this. Think about how you can support students so that everybody can be involved in that. Couple of just really kind of, they sound intuitive, but oftentimes we sacrifice them in the interest of time or things such as that. And I'm going to submit to you tonight, and because Jane's on mute, I'm going to say that she's going to agree with me that these are really important. And the first one is just very simply this: you want to start real simple and then build the complex. I often say, if you walk in and the first encounter you have with people is to say to them, I want you to write down your deepest, darkest secret and give it to me, then it probably is not something that they're going to do. And so you want to start with simple structures. You want to start with simple questions. You want to start with low risk type of activities, questions, and structures, so that you can build into more complex pieces. And remember here, you're making sure that it's equitable to everybody. So think about what are activities that everyone can participate in that are not super complex, and just kind of going through that. Make sure that you establish those ground rules, routines, and procedures. You want to make sure that you establish them first, but you also want to make sure that you're going over them with kids. Thinking about how many to roll out and to when is also important. And giving some, how do I say this? Giving some flexibility so that if they're not, say, great at it to start with, that it gives them time to build up that skill. Because again, following rules, routines, and routines and procedures, all of those things are skill-based. And so we're talking about building skill here. And then lastly, and this is the one I'm telling you right now, it is so important. Planning purposefully, making sure that you go into this and there's a purpose behind it. And because folks, the purpose is the why. And students want the why. If you've ever worked with fifth graders, they will ask you why about everything. If you say today we're going to determine what the word why means, the first question they're going to ask you is why. And that's okay, because developmentally we know that that's an important question for them. Well, the same is true for sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, and even younger kids as well. That why question is really important, and that why is the purpose. And so if you think about it in terms of making sure that you have outlined clearly and you're communicating effectively what your why is, really starts to invest students, because then they understand, oh, this isn't just a time for me to come in and do this, that, or the other. This is a really worthwhile moment for me to dig in and to put myself into a position to be successful with this. And so those are just a few of the strategies that you can use. And with that, I'll kick it back over to Jane.
Believe you're still you, Joe.
Oh, my bad. I apologize for that. I got my numbers messed up here. So considering that all that Jane and I have shared today, I'm going to ask you, if you're comfortable with this, to go ahead and drop it into the chat, but thinking in terms of what's one of the key insights that you're going to take away. So maybe there's an actionable piece that you're going to really take away and implement. And go ahead and, if you would, drop that into the chat, and we'll give everybody an opportunity to think through that.
Lots of key insights coming through in the chat right now. They're going by so fast, but just thinking about different activities, being purposeful, building upon prior knowledge, being intentional, starting simple, beginning with low risk, absolutely. Planning, making sure all your students are able to be a part of it. Only doing one new thing at a time. being able to carve out the time to do this with students. Absolutely. Seeing so many great ideas coming through. Before, that just made me smile, Joanne. Before I give you some of the resources that we provide at the Center for Responsive Schools that help support morning meeting and responsive advisory meeting, there was a question, and Joe, I want to say this question may have been for you, but being able to elaborate more on how you can explain the why to students. So when you're ready, Joe, you can answer that one. And then someone asked a question about some of the group activity favorites, some of my favorites, or is there a list someplace? Oh, I definitely have favorites, or ones at least that I use at the beginning of the year, and then there's favorites that I use throughout the year. But I also taught multiple grade levels, so there were some favorites that I would use with one grade level that was not maybe developmentally appropriate for another grade level. But I will say some of the ones I use at the beginning of the year with students, I definitely do Just Like Me. It is one that I can, and I'll tell you why I do it, even though it may seem like this is a really simple one, or this is really like an easy one. I also use it to introduce the other adults in my space. So adults who come in and work with students, adults that I've co-taught with. One day it'll just be me sharing things that are true about me. And then the next time it will be maybe the co-teacher I work with, and he or she will share things about him or herself that are true. And the students will find out what they have in common. We also use it, at least at our school, to also invite some of the special area teachers who the students don't always get to see, but it's important if we're building community, not just with our classroom, but with our students and the other adults, that we would invite, say, the PE teacher or the art teacher, and then students would find out more about those individuals as well, because they don't always get to. So the librarian would come in and share like, one of my favorite books is whatever, and it would be obviously related to that age group, and then students who also enjoy that, just like me. So it allows for that activity to happen over a series of days. And then eventually I open it up to students who might feel comfortable also sharing and finding out what they have in common with other students. So I tend to do that one at the beginning of the year because it's a great getting to know you one. For students, they do enjoy getting to know us as well. And so it gives them an opportunity to get to know the other adults in their classroom space, but also some of the other adults in the building that they don't always get to see or speak to or don't know as well. So that's one that I will usually do at the beginning of the year. A Warm Wind Blows is another one that I will sometimes do at the beginning of the year once we've done Just Like Me, and I feel that students are ready for that one. It's very similar in that students would all be in their seat, and we would just have one seat less. I also made sure when I had my morning meeting space that it was very clear whose spaces were whose. So whether that's poly spots that are down for those spaces, or sometimes it was like taped to the rug or to the floor, it would be something academic based. So it might be things like if we were working on fractions, there would be different fractional amounts on the meeting area. So then I could use that for the greeting, but I could also use it for the group activity and other things throughout the year. And then I would switch them. But it would be for a Warm Wind Blows, for like a Warm Wind Blows for anyone who, I don't know, is wearing socks today. And so if you're wearing socks, you would get up and you would find a different place to sit. That was not where you were originally sitting. So that was one that I would sometimes use to help support just getting to know one another, but also finding out things that students have in common. For RAM, it would have to be, that would also have to be Joe. And I think he's having some technical difficulties. So don't worry, I'm going to share with you some resources that you can use to find some ideas for RAM and for morning meeting. I see, because I want to make sure I get to these questions too. And doing your morning meeting first, and have several students who are tardy or miss out. Oh, I definitely had that as well. So there are some times where some years where I had students who came a little bit later, or who were not always present at the start of morning meeting. The important thing that I learned with my students who come a little bit later is they need to feel that sense of significance and belonging. So as soon as they walk through the door, and one of the things I would say to my entire group when I had them is, we look around and like, who in our group is not here yet? And we would name those people. Okay, so they should be here soon. They may not be here just when we start, but as soon as they come in, we're going to welcome them into our morning meeting. And so as soon as they would walk through the door, welcome, Jane. We're so glad you're here. Such and this person saved you a place right here. So as soon as you hang up your things, come join us. And so that they're still feeling that sense of belonging right from the start, even if they didn't get to join right away. And that's one of the things that I would do when I had students who came a little bit later. And then teaching online also had to do that a little bit too. So being able to teach with students who are online and they don't want to have their cameras on, which completely understand. And sometimes for me, sometimes that was like a comfort, and for other students, it might just be like they're just not comfortable. It's really personal and private to have people looking into your home. And so coming up with some of the activities might be things like using the emotions or the icons, doing things like renaming yourself when you're doing different greetings, or letting students know that you're going to do a shared greeting in a partner room. And in that shared greeting, make sure that person can see you. But when you come back to the group, it's okay if your camera's off, although I really want to be able to see your face. So that's something that you can do, recognizing sometimes it can be a little bit tricky for students to be able to do that comfortably. I want to be able to share resources with you. So some of these questions about where to get them, you can find out where they are. So some of the resources for elementary. The morning meeting book, the 3rd edition, although the 1st and 2nd edition are just as great. With the morning meeting book and the 80 morning meeting ideas and even the 99 greetings and activities, in that book, there are pages that actually say all of the activities and greetings, and then which ones are great to do at the beginning of the year and which ones are better at the end of the year, which ones have more of an academic focus, which ones are chants or songs, and which ones to use that would be developmentally appropriate for whichever grade you're using. And that's really helpful. I know for me, like I'm not a really big singer. And so I would pick the activities that didn't require a lot of singing. And so I can use those to find which ones are going to work best for my class. These are the morning, the responsive advisory meeting resources that would be great to use. For the responsive advisory meeting book, there are all of the different meetings that are in there, but then also online, there are some of the pages that supplement the responsive advisory meeting. And so you can use that to be able to find out how to start your first responsive advisory meeting, but then which ones to use with your students. Then these other 2 resources are just great for middle school in general as you're thinking about working with your middle school students to start the year in a positive way. Yes, and Joe's having internet issues, so it's okay. It's okay, Joe, got you. This resource is actually really helpful in that you can just get it when you go to our website. It is something you can just download for your age, for your grade level. There is a morning meeting one and a responsive advisory meeting one. So perhaps there are still some restrictions that you have in your building. And even if not, the cool thing about both of those resources is they are for the start of the year. So you can use them for activities, greetings, announcements, any part of morning meeting or responsive advisory meeting that you want to use at the start of the year. And they're already mapped out for the first 10 days. So that gives you a good starting point for your grade level. And you can find that on our website and be able to just download it based on your grade level. And these are just additional resources. We call these quick coaching guides, and just thinking about ways that you can help your students feel that sense of belonging at the start of the year. And so these ones, you can find the links to be able to get these particular resources on our website as well. But these are just great ones to just peruse and look at to be able to get some ideas of how to start the year with your students in a positive way. And finally, if you are interested in bringing Responsive Classroom to your school, you can always email the educational partnership at crslearn.org. But Joe and I are also very willing and able to answer questions. So if you get out of this webinar and you had a question that we did not answer, or you have a question that came up afterwards or while you're setting up your classroom, feel free to email myself or Joe, and we will get back to you. We're happy to take your questions, and we will gladly be able to answer and respond to them just by reaching out to us, and we'll definitely do that for you. And with that, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It was wonderful to have people from so many different places. And again, reach out anytime. Thank you for joining us this evening. Have a good evening or afternoon, depending on where you are.